Picture this. Every year, an average of 14 major prison riots occur worldwide, a shocking statistic that reveals the volatile nature of our global prison systems. These are not mere numbers, but a stark reflection of the unsettling reality behind the high walls and barbed wire. Prison riots, a term that sends chills down the spine, are a grim manifestation of the anger, frustration, and desperation that can brew within the confines of a prison. They represent an eruption of violence that often leads to destruction, injuries, and even loss of lives. Over the course of history, prison riots have shaped the narrative of prison reform, stirring conversations about human rights, living conditions, and the very purpose of incarceration. Today we will journey through the annals of history, exploring the top 10 prison riots and their lasting impacts. Now brace yourself as we dive into the chaotic world of prison riots, starting from the early 1900s. Our journey begins in 1929 at the Colorado State Penitentiary. Set against the backdrop of the Great Depression, the conditions within the penitentiary were ripe for unrest. Overcrowding and underfunding left inmates living in squalor, with a lack of basic necessities and medical care. On October 3rd, discontent burst into full-blown riot. Inmates seized control of the prison, taking guards hostage and setting buildings ablaze. The standoff lasted 2 days, ending only when the National Guard stormed the prison. The aftermath was brutal. 8 inmates dead, numerous injured, and extensive property damage. Yet the riot was not without consequence. The shocking conditions exposed during the riot led to a public outcry, triggering a wave of prison reform. New legislation was introduced to improve conditions and reduce overcrowding, setting a precedent for future prison management. This riot marked a significant turning point in the history of prison riots, setting the stage for the tumultuous events to come. Fast forward to 1946, where the infamous Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary became the battleground of a deadly riot. The Battle of Alcatraz was a 46-hour standoff that began on May 2, 1946. The catalyst? A failed escape attempt by 6 inmates who took 9 officers hostage. The situation escalated quickly, resulting in a violent clash that claimed the lives of 3 inmates and 2 officers. The event left the nation in shock, but it also unveiled the harsh realities of prison conditions. Overcrowding, poor living conditions, and the dehumanizing treatment of prisoners were brought to light. The Battle of Alcatraz marked a turning point in how the prison system was viewed and managed. It ignited a nationwide debate, leading to significant changes in prison policies and the treatment of inmates. In the aftermath, Alcatraz was scrutinized, and its reputation as an escape-proof prison was shattered. The Battle of Alcatraz, although brutal, sparked a crucial conversation on prison conditions that echoes to this day. A few years later, in 1952, the tranquility of Canada's Kingston Penitentiary was shattered by a violent uprising. In the heart of Ontario, Kingston Penitentiary, one of the oldest and most notorious prisons in Canada, became the stage for an eruption of violence that would go down in history. The roots of the riot were deep-seated, with prisoners revolting against inhumane conditions, inadequate food, and brutal treatment. Over a grueling 4-day period, the inmates took control, holding 6 prison guards hostage. The riot drew national attention, exposing the dire conditions inside Kingston Penitentiary and sparking a nationwide debate on prison reform. The fallout was significant. The riot prompted an in-depth investigation, leading to substantial changes in the Canadian penal system, including improvements in living conditions and the abolition of corporal punishment. So while the Kingston Penitentiary riot was a dark chapter in Canada's history, it also marked a turning point, catalyzing important reforms. The Kingston Penitentiary riot was a stark reminder of the need for change within the prison system. Next, we move to 1971, where the Attica prison in New York witnessed one of the most significant riots in American history. In September of that year, nearly half of the prison's population, around 1,000 inmates, took control of the facility. The cause? A boiling pot of grievances, including racial discrimination, poor living conditions, and inadequate medical care. The uprising lasted 4 intense days, during which the inmates made a series of demands for better treatment. Tragically, the retaking of the prison by law enforcement led to the death of 43 people, including 10 corrections officers and civilian employees. The aftermath of this event was monumental. The Attica uprising shone a harsh spotlight on the conditions within the prison system, sparking public outcry and prompting a wave of prison reform. It led to greater emphasis on inmates' rights, improved living conditions, and better staff training. The Attica prison uprising, while tragic, was a catalyst for prison reform in the United States. In 1980, the New Mexico State Penitentiary became the site of one of the deadliest prison riots in American history. A powder keg of grievances, from overcrowding to poor living conditions, ignited when inmates overpowered guards in the early hours of February 2nd. The rebellion quickly spiraled into a terrifying scene of violence and destruction, with 33 inmates losing their lives in the chaos. The riot was a gruesome display of pent-up anger and frustration. For 36 hours, the prison was in the hands of the inmates, who took their revenge on perceived enemies and destroyed much of the facility. The aftermath was equally shocking, revealing a system woefully inadequate in managing its inmate population. The fallout from the riot was significant. It led to sweeping changes in the prison system in New Mexico and beyond, with a new emphasis on improving living conditions, reducing overcrowding, and implementing better training for prison staff. The New Mexico State Penitentiary riot, brutal and horrifying, led to major changes in prison management. 5 years later, across the pond, the Strangeways prison in Manchester, England, was the scene of the longest prison riot in British history. The riot was sparked off in April 1985 due to a myriad of complaints from inmates, ranging from poor living conditions to the alleged mistreatment by prison officials. The event itself lasted an astonishing 25 days, with prisoners taking control of the prison and even climbing onto the roof to voice their demands to the public. The riot ended in a standoff between the inmates and the authorities, resulting in the tragic loss of 2 lives and countless injuries. In the aftermath, the Strangeways riot brought about a nationwide conversation on prison conditions and reform. It led to the Wolf Report, a comprehensive review of the British prison system, which recommended significant changes in prison management and the treatment of inmates. The Strangeways prison riot marked a turning point for British prison reform, leading to significant changes in the system. Fast forward to 1992, Brazil's Carandiru Penitentiary was the site of a deadly riot that ended in a horrifying massacre. The Carandiru Massacre was a bleak chapter in the history of prison riots. It was sparked by a clash between rival factions within the prison, leading to a full-blown riot. The response was brutal. Police stormed the prison, and when the dust settled, over 100 inmates were dead. The event sent shockwaves through Brazil and the world. The sheer scale of the violence raised serious questions about the conditions within the prison system, the handling of riots, and the value placed on the lives of prisoners. The aftermath was a whirlwind of investigations, court cases, and public outcry. Ultimately, the incident resulted in the closure of Carandiru Penitentiary and triggered a nationwide conversation on prison reform. The Carandiru Massacre, one of the deadliest prison riots in history, led to international outcry and calls for prison reform. In 2001, Argentina faced a series of prison riots that shook the nation to its core. The country was in the grips of a severe economic crisis, and the prisons, already overcrowded and underfunded, became a powder keg of tension and discontent. Inmates, frustrated by poor living conditions and a lack of basic human rights, rose up in a wave of violent protests that swept through 29 prisons across the country. The riots lasted for several weeks, leaving a trail of destruction and a death toll of over 30. The immediate aftermath was characterized by a state of shock and confusion, but it also led to a nationwide conversation about the state of Argentina's prisons. These discussions eventually resulted in significant changes, including improvements in prison infrastructure, enhanced inmate services, and a commitment to uphold prisoners' rights. The Argentine prison riots were a wake-up call, prompting a major overhaul of the Argentine prison system. Lastly, we arrive in 2017, where South Africa's Great Vaal Uprising marked a violent chapter in the history of prison riots. The stage was set by the swelling discontent among inmates at the Vaal Correctional Centre, primarily due to overcrowding, poor living conditions, and allegations of abuse. The simmering tension reached a boiling point, and the inmates rebelled, leading to an uprising that lasted several days. The event was a stark reminder of the volatility within prison systems worldwide, and it brought the plight of the inmates to the fore. As the dust settled, the aftermath revealed a dire need for change. The uprising led to a renewed focus on prison reform in South Africa, with an emphasis on improving living conditions and addressing the root causes of inmate discontent. While the uprising was a tragic event, it served as a catalyst for change. The Great Vaal Uprising, while tragic, has been instrumental in sparking ongoing discussions about prison reform,